What movie was better than the book, and why? Jaws, because everyone in the novel is a terrible person, and a lot of the tension in the film is removed because the guys hunting the shark just get to go home every night in the book. Steven Spielberg said when he read the novel he found himself rooting for the shark because the human characters were so unlikable. The movie got rid of the unnecessary subplots like the mayor's involvement with the Mayfair and Ellen Brody having an affair with Hooper. Shawshank Redemption. It was part of a 4-part novella released by Stephen King. The story was very short, but very well written. I just feel like the movie really captured the spirit of the story and gave some depth to the characters. Plus, the acting was great. Same with Stand By Me, out of the same collection. Battleship. The book was just a bunch of rules. God, I forgot that film existed. IDK if your comment made me happy, since it was a good joke, or pissed me off, because I remember that film. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? The book was supposed to be written as film noir, but it ends up as a disjointed mess. The characters are there, but they have none of the charm of the movie. Eddie isn't a good man, who's ruining his life with booze after the loss of his brother. He's a drunk a-hole, just because Roger is dead, etc. The plot is also different. The movie took the idea of humans and toons interacting, and went in a completely different direction. There was also the fact that the toons talked in thought bubbles, and oftentimes their thought bubbles ended up littering the streets. Schindler's List. The book was almost unreadable. Then again, Emma Dumber. List of names gets boring after a while. Big Fish. The movie explores the wondrous world of the father's outrageous stories, but the book lacks all that lavish imagery. Instead, it's just a bitter retelling from spoiled child who thought his daddy didn't love him enough. I love the movie, but didn't know it was based on a book. Forrest Gump was way better than the book it was based on. Came here for this. Read the book in high school because I loved the movie. The soundtrack for the movie was my favorite album for most of my junior year, but that was just, it was something. Anyway, that being said, Groom did get the right flavors of the Deep South, and especially Alabama into that book. Still, the movie was better. Jojo Rabbit was better than Caging Skies. The book was so goddamn bleak that it probably wouldn't have been adapted otherwise. Taika Waititi stated that he never even finished the book and stopped reading halfway, which is why the movie only shows a short part of the book and ends so differently. Might be unpopular, but I think The Princess Bride. I found Buttercup's character way worse in the book, even to a point where I was like, okay dude, cut ties, you're better off without her, and in the movie I never feel that really. For fans of the movie, there's a book called As You Wish by Kari Elwes about the behind the scenes stories of making the movie. It's a great and funny read. There's crazy cheers like Andre the Giant 16-second farts and him parring out in a hotel lobby because he drinks alcohol by the barrel. Or Mandy Patinkin slapping Andre because he wasn't saying his lines fast enough. Kingsman is better than the comic, mainly because they didn't follow the comic all that much. Mark Millar is interesting because every adaptation of his work has made me realize all of the flaws that were there in the original I never noticed. John Hammond from Jurassic Park was much better in the movie. In the book he was kind of your standard greedy businessman. In the movie, was a dreamy idealist with good intentions, which made it so much more heartbreaking when the park inevitably failed. Edit. Not speaking about book versus movie as a whole, just my opinion on the one character. I actually also noticed they switched the little boy and girl characters in the book and movie. In the book the little girl is basically useless and whines and complains the whole time, while the boy saves the day almost exclusively. I thought it was cooler for the movie to split up the character traits more evenly between the two. Queen Bees and Wild Apes, mostly known by its movie adaptation name as Mean Girls. I mean, they're basically nothing alike, but the book is supposed to be a self-help book. I wouldn't call that adaptation. I feel it's generous just to say the movie was inspired by the book. I think Arrival was better, and that's coming from someone who really liked the short story. The movie is just better at telling that story overall. I tend to agree, because the film really brings out the story and makes it more digestible. That being said, Ted Chiang is easily one of the greatest science fiction authors of all time. Nobody better say Percy Jackson or we gon' have beef. Edit. This is my most amount of updates and I'm proud it is. I hope that someone remakes the movies one day. The books deserve justice. Fantastic Mr. Fox. It's my favorite book of all time, but goddamn that movie is incredible. Wes Anderson just made it his own thing. The movie has so much more character. Mr. Fox in the movie is so charming and intelligent, but also 10 times more arrogant than he was in the books. But he makes up for it in the end. Also, his backstory with the wolf is amazing. Mrs. Fox is also so much goddamn better. In the book, she literally did nothing except cook the huge meal at the end. The scene in the movie where she fights Rat with a chain still gets me pumped up. And don't even get me started on Ash and Christopherson. Oh my god, what a goddamn improvement from the 3 small foxes from the books. Ash is so goddamn relatable, and Christopherson is so lovable. Their parts in the movie were my favorites. You're supposed to be my lab partner. You're disloyal. Fight Club. The book had a better ending, but it was written in such bizarre style it was a chore to read. And it's a short book too. Edit. This Justin. Did you guys know that the author Chuck Palahniuk also liked the movie better than the book? I know this because Tyler knows this. The Mist. Even Stephen King agreed. Yay, the ending really went the darkest ducking route possible and that took a lot of guts from the filmmakers. Ready Player One was simultaneously better and worse than the book. It was worse because the movie's puzzle plot made little sense. You're telling me Noon and the history of the $1 billion puzzle thought to go backwards movie? But it was better because it cut out a lot of the neck bunches in the book. Like how the protagonist spends 3 pages explaining differences in Atari games to someone and then everyone claps because of how awesome it was. The movie's take on the villain ruined it for me. In the book has a meticulous expert of the Oasis that decided to work for the company that wants to take it over. He was a worthy adversary and definitely somebody the main characters feared. In the movie he was a bumbling product of bureaucracy. He knew nothing about the Oasis and spent almost every moment on screen as a punching bag. The Godfather. I like the book, but the film is phenomenal. The Prestige again. Good book, phenomenal film. This is immediately what came to mind for me. I don't need chapters about Son is Ma with Dong and Bridesmaids wide set cervix. The Silence of the Lambs. It was incredibly drawn out at times and they were right to cut a lot of it out of the movie. The author also feels the need to describe the hell out of everything and it gets tedious to read. Doesn't hurt that it's one of the best movies ever made, haha. It Chapter 1 was great. Plus it didn't end with all the kids banging Bev like the Stephen King novel. So it gets my vote. True, I think King could have made it work without the sewer train. Edit, or Jeter train by popular demand. Holes. I don't know if it was better, but damn the movie did the book justice. One of my favorite childhood books and movies. I really wished they had the scene where Stanley's lawyer learns Zero was the dude who was guilty of the crime her client was guilty of. If only for the comedic value. But yeah, I have to respect the directors refusing to cast a fat kid that make them lose a lot of weight and just cast a skinny kid due to health reasons. Stardust. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy Neil Gaiman, and the Stardust book was really good, but the movie was absolutely enchanting. I mean, seeing Robert De Niro as Captain Shakespeare, life-changing. Not to mention a much better ending. Stardust is the spiritual sequel / successor to The Princess Bride and is one of the best fantasy films ever made. Give me those two, Willow and The Lord of the Rings, Imset. The Notebook. Rachel McAdams brought flair and charisma that wasn't in the book. Edit. Wow, thank you kind stranger for this award. Frankly I'd say that about any Nicholas Sparks book. I'm not a fan of his writing style at all. I got so bored trying to read The Last Song, but found the movie pretty cute. How to Train Your Dragon. In the books the dragons are little and caught to fish and do other chores. To be fair, the only things that the books and movies share are some names and other things like that. 50 Shades of Grey, just because it couldn't possibly have been any worse. Take away the abusive and stalkerish aspects of the story, and you're still left with characters with zero chemistry with each other, a plot that goes nowhere, and a writing style reminiscent of an adolescent girl who figured out what happens when she wears tight jeans and crosses her legs just right. The version of 12 Angry Men. I found the book boring, but the film resonates even decades after I watched it. Plays are notoriously hard to read because they are not meant to be read. We don't read songs either. Edit. Everyone listing songs meant to be sung in a dry tone are missing the point. You're still digesting the media in the way it was meant to be consumed. Reading a play is a different media entirely. Double edit. Y'all, I'm an Ella teacher, haha. Most of the time we don't get to pick the curriculum. Blame the higher ups that want an esteemed curriculum instead of a modern one. Dogma. Felt the Bible wasn't as funny, and where was Alan Rickman? He's in it, he's the narrator. You don't read the Bible in Alan Rickman's voice. Stardust. I forgot my why. The book was somewhat dark and dreary as I remember it, but the movie is a brilliant fanciful adventure. Didn't expect to see that one up here. I read the book years before the movie, and I liked it very much, and I personally consider the book and film to be equal, both the goods and the bads being in balance. Captain Shakespeare was more fun in the movie, but the dead brothers got more backstory in the books. I'm glad we have both to enjoy, or to not enjoy, depending on personal taste. Last of the Mohicans. Boring slog of a book, epic period piece action movie. Thank you. I read the book because I loved the movie, and it was brutal. I told this to my American literature professor and she said, "Oh, you poor thing. Nobody likes that book." Shrek. They took a 36-page book and turned it into the greatest movie of all time. It was ahead of its time. Chef's kiss. Call Me by Your Name. The movie was a beautiful study of silences. In the book you experienced every thought going through a 17-year-old boy's head. It was manic. In the movie you had to rely on Chalamet's performance to understand what was going on in his head. The ending was much better in the movie as well, as much as I loved the mania of his inner monologue. Wanted. And you may be asking yourself, but isn't that movie not very good? And you'd be correct. It's not. The comic that it's based on, however, is god awful. The movie changes so much about the book that it's hardly the same story, but it removes the weirdo rape fantasies present throughout the comic that seem more like punklines than character building. It's a great concept squandered by Mark Millar's juvenile, edgelord writing. I found that a lot of adaptations of Mark Millar's work tend to be better than the source material. Kicker, Kingsman, and their sequels. Miller strikes me as a comic book writer who really hates comic books. The Devil Wears Prada. I have admiration for the people who made the story for the screen, because the book is nothing similar. Amazing movie that came out a very meh book. I love the movie, and I went to read it, and had to force myself to finish the book, since I started it. Hate read it. Andy is so unlikable in the book, like you have to wonder how she kept the job at all, or had any friends or a boyfriend. All she does is complain. I'm glad they were able to make a wonderful movie out of this, because Meryl Streep is flawless as Miranda Priestley. Jaws. Completely agree. I love the movie version of Matt Hooper. The book version is a complete wreck. Just here to say that, if anyone says Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I'm going to ban him from the internet. I feel like that movie did the best with what they had. You're never going to capture the wit that comes baked into every paragraph of Hitchhikers, so what can you do instead? That's also a good reason that it made a much better radio play. In radio, you can get away with loads more narration than you can in film. After all, radio is not a visual medium. The narration and structure of humor that book has was never going to translate flawlessly to the world of film, but for what they needed, it checked about every box it could. Still nowhere near as good as the book though. Jurassic Park. The movie created more suspense than I think was possible in the book. The build up to the first time we see the T-Rex wasn't quite as intense on the page as it was on the screen. The book had a much more intense horror element to it. Spoilers like Campy's eating that ducking baby. American Psycho. The movie did a fine job portraying how insane he was. There were passages in the book that almost made me put it down and stop reading it. Just too much. Pure shock value. I think the book and film are great in different ways. The book is deliberately over the top in its descriptions of things to the point of being tedious, which contracts to the extremely graphic imagery of the real psychopath to convey the satire. The film is a fantastic performance from Bale and manages to portray the obsessiveness with consumerism of the yuppies at the time and their culture, but does it in a way that is more a comedy noir which suits the medium better. Where the heart is. There is some indigenous spirit walking in the middle of it that makes no sense with the rest of the storyline of a poor white trash girl having a baby in Walmart. They cut all that out for the movie and the movie works much better in terms of plot. My love for Forney will be forever. Movie is better. Children of Men. The movie was a million times better. The book had no scope. I scrolled way too far before seeing Children of Men. The book is mediocre and the film is a masterpiece. Matilda, the character, was a hell of a lot more likable in the film than the book. Also the actress who plays Miss Trunchbull in the movie does an outstanding job. The entire LOTR series. I'm not sure why, since it's been well over a decade since I read the LOTR books, but I found reading through them to be a chore, as opposed to the movies, which in my opinion are some of the greatest films ever made. While I'm of the opinion that the books are better, only real reason is I prefer Tolkien's extended world building to the cuts made due to the limitations film presents as a medium. I can absolutely see why people think the movies are better. It's the only community I think I've ever encountered where everybody is totally okay whether you prefer the movies to the books or vice versa, because the movies are just that damn good, and because we don't talk about the Hobbit movies. A Little Princess. The book was okay, but it was definitely a children's book. The movie was absolutely beautiful. Alfonso Cuarón is an amazing director. Edit. I totally didn't expect this comment to get any attention. I still stand by my opinion that the movie was way better than the book, but it's interesting to hear other opinions. I love getting to discuss one of my favorite movies as a kid that's still beautiful as an adult. I remember this movie fondly. I watched it many times when I was younger. That and The Secret Garden. The Martian, mainly because the visuals were amazing, and it made the story so much better to be able to see everything. The Martian is one of my favorite sci-fi books, and one of my favorite sci-fi movies. For completely different reasons. The movie got everything just right, and picked the perfect actor for Watney, and I'm firmly in this camp for the book. Trainspotting. The book is pretty good, but the movie is a ducking masterpiece. Choose life. Both were utterly atrocious, but I'd have to say the 50 Shades of Grey film was better than the book, because you didn't have to listen to her in a monologue full of oh my and mine a goddess did a backflip etc. Ugh. It helps that a real screenwriter got her hands on it. Give that Twilight fanfiction a few touch-ups. Slumdog Millionaire. I feel that it's somewhat cheating in regards to this question for films like Slumdog Millionaire, Forrest Gump, and Jojo Rabbit, because they aren't even trying to be faithful adaptations. They take a lot of liberties and go in a lot of different directions than the source material. So whether it's even the same story as the book Q&A on which it's based is debatable. But I certainly enjoyed it more. I read the book Q&A and I actually love it more than the movie. Diary of a Wimpy Kid. They rearranged a lot, pulled things from multiple books for one movie, and made it so the main character actually has some growth. In the books he remains the same unchanged sociopath who learns nothing. Just not the fourth movie. Oh god, not the fourth movie. The movie Fletch wisely left out the fact that he sleeps with a 14-year-old prostitute who overdoses and whose body he then buries on the beach. Yet I could imagine Chevy Chase doing that scene well. I'm gonna go with The Last Unicorn. It was one of my favorite movies as a kid. I didn't even know it was a book until I was in college. Now, the book is amazing, and the movie is extremely true to the book, more so than any other book-to-screen movie I've ever seen. But, the book is not intended for little children, and the cartoon movie adaptation is completely fine for little kids. I love that I can introduce my toddler girls to some of my favorite literature so early on, and they absolutely love it. A fun fact. One of the reasons the movie is so faithful to the book is because Christopher Lee was a huge fan of the book and would bring his personal copy to set / during the screenwriting process to make sure that they were doing it justice. Horton here's a who. There's a lot more character put into all the people in Hoville and Jim Carrey kills it as Horton. The story is accomplished in an effective way that still retains the moral and overall feel of the original, and the movie is allowed to flesh out the world in a way that Drive Seuss didn't. To those of you who say, but it's so short and would been really hard to mess up improving on a book like that, I submit any of the other adaptations of Drive Seuss work made in the last 25 years. That last sentence is very true. The Princess Bride, the unabridged version of the book, droned on needlessly at times. It was an interesting read, but the movie was an immense joy. Read the book once, but watch the movie numerous times. The only argument I've heard that give a point to the book involves Humperdinck's epic zoo vs the Pit of Despair. Not a movie, but the TV show Dexter was better than the book, at least at first. Went off the rails eventually. I hear the books go high off the rails. Like his Dark Penger ends up being an ancient spirit off the rails. Blade Runner the novel was good, but the movie perfected the tone, and quite honestly I thought Deckard was written better for the film. I liked the book better, but they really are hard to compare. I feel like the tone is completely different between the two. The movie is noir, while the book is more of a dark comedy. Jaws. Because the book is ducking awful, with an idiotic subplot about Hooper and Broder's wife, and also the Mafia, for some ducking reason. Howl's Moving Castle. While the book explained the characters better, the movie was so beautifully done, and tells a story about companion and life, that the book doesn't. May I posit that the book has 2 very excellent sequels? I also think the movie turned out so damn beautifully because Miyazaki had wanted to make Howl for years and wanted to get it just right. He even gave Diana Wynne-Jones a private screening and she really loved it. The Godfather. I think a lot of people can agree with that. Well, don't know if comics are valid, but a lot of MCU movies are better than the comics. At least, you know, they are consistent, kinda. This is a good point. The Civil War comics paint Tony Stark as such an a-hole. In the movie, I think they made both sides very sympathetic. Les Miserables, because Val Jane's in a debate lasts about 100 pages and the opening number is about a third of the book. It just goes on and on. You're telling me you didn't enjoy the huge tangent about the intricacies of the Parisian sewer system? Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. That's because a book can't sing you world of pure imagination. Annihilation. The book had a slow pace that didn't create the same atmosphere as the movie. I think the only thing I liked better in the movie was that terrifying bear thing. Otherwise they are too different. The director even said he read the book once and never went back to it so he could go off his impression of the book. But that book would have been near impossible to adapt accurately. The way the indescribable is described could never be filmed. How to Train Your Dragon. Book Vikings proved themselves as worthy Vikings by training a dragon, meaning Hiccup never had to risk literally everything by changing the way the world sees dragons. Movie Vikings proved themselves by killing dragons, making the world more tense when Hiccup went against that by befriending Toothless. Book Toothless was a cocky, arrogant, cat-sized dragon who spoke with a really bad stutter and did nothing but annoy Hiccup. Movie Toothless is a dragon larger than a horse known as the offspring of lightning and death itself, and could go from adorable to downright terrifying in seconds, and risked his life for Hiccup countless times. The Secret Garden. Actually seeing the garden was amazing, and the acting was incredible. It really matters which one. The 1993 film with Kate Mabry is a masterpiece of resonant imagery and storytelling. I used it to teach archetypal analysis and quest stories to high school seniors for years. Then I finally read the book, and I was like, where is all the awesome stuff? This is so shallow. Catching Fire was so well done, and not as boring as the book. They didn't explain that various characters throughout the competition were plants for the rebellion with varying degrees of knowledge. That was a major part of the ending that just didn't get illustrated at all in the film. I know at least my family got confused as a result. Gone Girl. I keep telling people they should be considered two different narratives, book and movie, but man, David Fincher blew it out of the park with his adaptation. Also, the screenwriter was the author of the book. Dances with Wolves. In the book, Dunbar stays with the natives, and I felt it was out of character with what had happened before. In the book he is even packing his things to leave, but it's then convinced to stay. I feel the movie was a better ending. Plus the sheer epic scope of the landscapes and the buffalo hunt were even more incredible than I pictured in the book. That movie is one of the greatest westerns ever made. To be honest, most books I've read are better. So much so that I won't watch a film before I have read the book if it's based on one. The Green Mile by Stephen King. The film was definitely better than the book for me. 1408. The producers took a good short story and expanded it into a real mind trip of a movie. Stephen King adaptations are hit and miss, but occasionally there's a real gem. Biggest miss, Under the Dome. No Country for Old Men. The book is great, but MacArthur's style of writing makes it pretty difficult to read and follow the flow of what's going on. Meanwhile, the movie has you on the edge of your seat, has a very eerie feel to it, and the casting is very spot on. The Coen brothers are the reason why here. One of the best directed movies of all time. Captain America: Civil War. The comic event that it is based on doesn't make a ton of sense. It misses out on a lot of opportunities, and Tony Stark is strawmanned. The movie makes all the character motivations clear and presents both sides equally. This is a great example of improving the execution of an interesting idea with a second crack. Batman: Under the Red Hood is another example of this. I agree, especially Batman: Under the Red Hood, that was amazing. But part of me wished Civil War came out once more characters were introduced to the MCU, just to have a conflict that felt as live as I thought it should be, affecting so many of the characters in so many different ways, but I know that's more of a pipe dream. To All the Boys I've Loved Before. I watched the movie and loved it so much that I bought the book trilogy. The movie is beautiful, but reading the book made me realize that it's the cinematography and acting that make the movie so good. The actual plotline is really cheesy. The books are also written in a really simple way for a much younger audience. Girl with a Dragon Tattoo was pretty close to beating the book. Edit, and I mean the Rooney Mara one. I agree, for the Swedish version. The remake was cold. It all comes down to Noomi Rapace for me. There's also an extended version, which is really just the TV miniseries. Worth it. The Ritual. The film only depicted the first half of the book, which is great, because the book devolves into stupid, incoherent drivel after that. Seriously, the author had a good thing going for the first 220 or so pages, some really good characterization and chills, but then it got dumb. The novel should stopped where the film did, instead of basically adding a half-eared, nonsensical sequel that nobody asked for as the second act. Netflix actually did a fantastic adaptation of the book, and the film is far superior to Adam Neville's novel. Requiem for a Dream. The book isn't bad, but the movie makes you feel for all the characters. I saw the movie before reading the book, so I may have expected too much from the book. Not a movie, but a series. The 100. Honestly, the books lacked so much work and didn't have much of the plot and characters the series has. Eragon. JK, the movie was steaming garbage. Arrival. No disrespect to Ted Chiang, as Stories of Your Life is great, but the movie allows for a much deeper portrayal of the moral dilemma. Starship Troopers. The movie is nothing like the book, which I think is a good thing. The movie was fun and had a ton of action. The book to me was dull and hard to finish. I felt like half the book was just covering his military training. This was one of the first times I thought the movie was far better than the book. They're such different works. I feel like Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers is above all else an indictment of Heinlein's novel, which was already a response to political views. It, you know why. If that one scene was removed, then the book would be a lot better. My brain just sort of blocks that scene out when I remember the book like it was some sort of traumatic event. Fight Club, American Psycho, Misery, Shawshank, Shining, Doctor Sleep, Gone Girl, Green Mile, The Dead Zone. To Kill a Mockingbird, Forrest Gump, Schindler's List, Godfather, The Disaster Artist, Trainspotting, Little Women, LOTR, No Country for Old Men, Goodfellas, Room, The Social Network, The Exorcist, Psycho, Silence of the Lambs, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Perks of Being a Wallflower. No way in hell the Misery movie is better than the book. I was very disappointed in the movie after reading the book. The book is a masterpiece. I read the Metro series, and it was a bit difficult to understand the wording in a couple of the books. Sometimes you would have to reread a couple pages to figure out what the hell was going on. I then played the game, which was pretty good, and then reread the book and I could put stuff together easier. The Metro books are extremely difficult to read in English. I ended up listening to it on Audible. It was so much easier to comprehend. 10/10ths would recommend. Oh my, you watched until the end? That's fucking awesome, dude. Thanks for watching.